Welcome to the Mixtape with Scott, a podcast that provides an oral history of economics that covers the last 50 years of the profession, where I focus on my own interests in economics, like topics like Gary Becker's students, causal inference, as well as this large march of PhD economists out of academia and into the tech industry. But I run through these changes in important periods by first and foremost listening to the personal stories of economists from those topics as they walk me through their childhood to present and I also share the biographies sometimes of their work, sometimes even the work's own origins. I'm your host, Scott Cunningham. This week, I had the wonderful opportunity to interview my old professor, Dr. George Selgin. George is a one-of-a-kind economist from whom I learned a great deal. He's a real maverick. He taught all of us at Georgia how to be courageous, careful students of other people's work, listening carefully, always being curious, always being respectful, and engaging with people critically. His own work crosses and blends monetary theory with economic history to study something that he specialized in for a long time with Larry White called free banking. George has also written on the Industrial Revolution and is currently working on another new book. He now serves as the Director Emeritus of the Cato Institute Center for Monetary and Financial Alternatives, where he's the editor-in-chief of the center's blog, Alt-M. In our conversation, we delved into his entire life, just like other podcasts, going back to when he grew up, his time with his family, his closeness with his brother, how he became interested in Austrian economics, his time at the New York University, where he studied with the famous Israel Kirzner, Larry White, and his time at George Mason. We didn't get to finish everything, so we left it open for a part two, depending on whether I can get back around to it. I hope to talk to him some more. So thank you for tuning again. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can check out my Substack, Scott's Substack, where I try to regularly post what I call explainers about econometrics. Well, it is a real pleasure today to have someone I've known for a long time and admired for even longer, Dr. George Selgin. George, thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Not at all, Scott. It's really good to be chatting with you again.
Yeah. Okay. For the sake of the listener, can you tell us your name, your job title, and who pays your paycheck?
Those questions are a little more complicated than you might realize. The name is easy enough. That's George Selgin. And my job title is Senior Fellow and Director Emeritus of the Center for Monetary and Financial Alternatives at the Cato Institute. Oh. My paycheck, I think, still comes from the Cato Institute, but shortly we'll have a different arrangement where I am working technically for another employer, and that has to do with my being in Grenada now.
Okay, so you're in. How long have you been in Grenada?
I moved here on the 1st of October last year.
Oh, why'd you pick that place?
Well, there were all kinds of reasons, including book learning, as usual for me, that drew me to Grenada. I had not been here but once in 2021, which was long enough to convince me that it was the place I wanted to live. I had been considering it, and I took that trip for the reason of making up my mind. And I can only say that whatever my reasons were, I have absolutely no regrets. I consider this place probably as close as I'll get to paradise.
Oh man, wow. I don't think I've ever been.
Which is telling you something else about me too, but in any event, it's not bad.
That's great. Well, let's start with an icebreaker. Okay, so what's a vacation that you went on as a kid that you sort of wish you could go back in time and do it again right now?
Oh my goodness. I'm torn. My father took me on several vacations when I was quite young, and they were all great. I'll mention the one he took me to the Caribbean. I think he took me on 2 trips to the Caribbean. The first one was to St. Barthélemy.
Yeah.
Which this was in the days before it really became a jet set hangout.
Yeah.
But it was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful island. I didn't realize at the time, of course, that I was not only the Caribbean I was seeing for the first time, was an especially nice sample of it.
Yeah.
And we stayed at a hotel that was later immortalized, sort of, by Jimmy Buffett, called Autour de Rocher. He made a song about it. When he wrote about it, when Buffett wrote about it, some years later, it was already becoming kind of a disco place and all. But when my dad and I were there, it was a lovely, elegant place, sitting on the cliffs with a big rock in the middle, sure enough, which is why it was named that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just loved that trip. I became a big fan of the Caribbean. I love to swim and snorkel, and later on scuba dive.
Yeah.
And the food. My mom was a great cook, is a good cook still, but the food there was the French Antilles, spicy food, spicy French food, can't do better. And I became a huge fan of two things. First, the spiny lobster, and then boudin noir, spicy boudin noir, black pudding. And I think that was my first real experience with food that was neither American nor Italian. That really turned me on to the possibilities out there.
Yeah, that's great. I did I went on my honeymoon to St. Bart's.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I was in we got like an incredible deal. And I can never remember his name. Is it Nureyev, the Russian ballet dancer that had his place there? We got Nureyev. We got to stay. Somebody who knew somebody gave us his or gave us a really cheap deal at his vacation home that was right on the rocks, and he had this like
lovely,
real. It was just absolutely. I loved St. Bart's. It would be expensive.
That's a lovely place.
Yeah.
How about that airport?
Yeah, that's a fun flight. You're like,
yeah, that's one of the trickiest landings in any airport anywhere.
Yeah,
where they've got a highway on one end and the sea at the other.
Yeah,
and they have to land so close. They have to start very close to the highway. The wheels practically touch the roofs of the cars.
Yeah,
in order to take advantage of the full length of the airstrip. Because if they land too far down, which is easy enough to do if you don't want to get near the cars as you land, you probably end up in the drink.
Yeah,
which has happened more than once.
Oh gosh, that's terrible. Oh yeah, I remember I didn't quite. They'd warned us, but I did not know what it was about to happen.
It was fun.
Scary. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Well, so where did you grow up, and what did your parents do for a living when you were a little kid?
Well, my mom was a housewife for much of my life, not all of it. She did some business, and she was a very good business person. So if my mother made any money, she would squirrel it away and end up with a lot more. My father was an electrical engineer, basically an inventor, and he had all kinds of patents and all that. Very, very brilliant man. I grew up, I say we because it was my twin brother, Peter, and I. We grew up in Connecticut, but I actually was born in Bethesda, Maryland, so very close to DC, where I was working until October. And my father was an employee at the Bureau of Standards. Now, he was Italian. Both my parents were Italian, but my dad had been in the United States for some time before he met my mother in Italy, and then ended up marrying her and bringing her back to the United States. And I'll tell you a little story about that. So I was born in Bethesda, as I said, but soon after my father decided to move, and he quit his very well-paying job at the Bureau of Standards. He was making quite a lot of money, and went into business by himself, which seemed like an odd thing to do. But it makes perfect sense if you see a picture of my mother back then. And the explanation is simply that she was far, far too good looking for my father to have been able to keep her if there was any competition whatsoever nearby. So realizing that Washington was full of potential rivals, he upped and moved us to Connecticut to a small
I haven't heard that explanation.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship
there, as far as I know, is only so that my father would have a better chance of not getting ditched by my mom.
Marriage markets as a driver of entrepreneurship. I haven't heard of that before.
Well, that's right. I'm not sure that was financially a smart move, but my father did manage to keep my mother. It was a
That's
close
great.
run thing now and then, but he did manage to keep her, and he was lucky too, because when he was older, and when he fell ill, my mom
Oh,
took very good care of him.
yeah,
So he made the right moving to Bethel was the right move
yeah,
in that
yeah,
regard.
yeah. You and Peter, y'all were close. I've always gotten the sense that your brother and you are really close.
We are. I mean, we are fraternal twins. We're not
Yeah.
identical, but we're very close.
He's an
We
artist.
What's that?
Is he an
He's
artist?
he's an artist, a writer. He got all the right side of the brain, and a pretty good amount of left brain.
Yeah.
And I got some left brain and not very much right brain.
Yeah.
So he was everything: a writer, singer, uh,
Ah,
actor, painter, caricaturist, anything that's on that side of the brain, my brother is not just pretty good at, but extremely good at.
yeah.
So,
Where does
but
he live?
he lives in Georgia, and my mom is now down there in Georgia with Peter.
Oh,
As you know, of course, you and I were in Georgia together.
yeah.
So the whole Selgin family, one way or the other, has ended up at Georgia at some point.
Uh-huh.
Unfortunately, my brother came down there just 3 years or so before I left, so we didn't overlap for that long.
Was he in
he
Athens?
No, he's in Milledgeville.
Oh,
He
okay.
he got a teaching job in Milledgeville, and he had to do that because he was doing freelance in New York City, and then he had a child, and he realized he needed a more steady income.
Yeah.
So he went searching for teaching jobs and eventually landed that one. And I would go visit him on my motorcycle. It was a lovely drive from Athens down to Milledgeville, and he lived on the lake there, very pretty.
Oh,
But that
wow.
only lasted 3 years, and then I went to DC, which I didn't want to go to DC. I despised DC.
Mm-hmm.
I still do. I'm sorry, DC people, but yuck. And but I went because John Allison at Cato offered me a job opportunity I really couldn't pass up. And there's an
Yeah.
interesting story there we can talk about. Anyway, after I was in DC, my brother got my mother to sell her place in Connecticut. It was no longer the one we grew up in. That's been razed to the ground, alas. And she joined him in Milledgeville, where they both live now.
Oh, okay. Okay. Um, well, so when you were in school in Connecticut, if I had like looked on your bookshelf, because you've always seemed like a real, a big reader. If I had looked on your bookshelf when you were a high school student, would I have found a bunch of books? And if so, what might be some of the books I would see?
Yeah, certainly by the time I was a senior, I had a lot of books. I had these two bookcases,
Hmm.
3-foot bookcases, and I refinished them and put one on top of the other so I could have a proper 6-foot bookcase.
Yeah.
And they were loaded up with books. And by the end, it was economics,
Oh,
which
really? By the end of high school?
by the end of high school, I was starting to get interested in economics. I became much more interested later on. And
Hmm.
then, but before that, my main interest was marine biology and oceanography. But I
Oh.
read all sorts of stuff. But the marine biology and oceanography interest went way back, way back. Um, I used to, as a child of about 5 years old, I used to pretend I was scuba diving on the living room floor, and I remember
Ah.
watching Sea Hunt and another show that didn't last long called The Aquanauts. And I
Ah.
liked The Aquanauts more because they had single hose regulators, and I thought those were really cool. But they didn't look as cool when you cut them. Anyway, so my passion was marine biology, oceanography. If
Huh.
I could have chosen any career, and time was not an issue, I would have crewed on the Calypso with
Uh-huh.
Jacques. So that would have been
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, so what was your first, do you remember your first experience where economics was sort of your first experience with economics?
Well, I had read a little bit of economics. I think the first, if I really had to say the first experience, it was in high school. I had a teacher who taught a course on American economic history.
Mm.
And
Wow.
I,
In high school.
yeah, he taught an economic history course, American history course from using an economics perspective.
Oh, wow.
And I remember quite well. By the way, I was not a good high school student. I was a huge troublemaker. I really was a very serious troublemaker. I mean, they thought I was a delinquent. I still have some letters written by my homeroom teacher about how awful I was. Anyway, Mr. I this maybe was it high school? You know, this might have been earlier than high school. I can't remember anymore, but it might have been it might have been middle school. Mr. Blum taught the class,
Uh-huh.
and I remember being quite impressed because I had not realized before that history wasn't just a, a story of things that happen,
Right.
something where you could explain why things happen. There were
Oh.
reasons why this happened instead of that. And
Mm.
that's what that approach, of course, did. And I thought that's cool, you know.
Oh, that
But
is interesting.
at the time, I didn't form any. Uh, I had no plans to become an economist. That happened later on, and that was a result of two things. I became an economist for two things, and both had to do with my family.
Mm.
Uh, the first was my pain in the ass brother, because every time I would try to do something, if I tried to do any acting, or if I tried to sing, or if I tried to make a painting and all, he had to do it better than me. So that's why he became really good in the arts for one single reason, which was to be better and outshine me.
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking, all right, everything I try, I can't compete with Peter. If I try out for the school play, he's going to get the part. If I try out for course, he's going to get that. If I try to get a girl, he's going to get her. Usually, he got them after I got them, but never mind. Anyway, I, I said, well, you know, I've got to come up with something that my brother's not going to be interested in because it's so boring and square and all that. And
Uh-huh.
marine biology was a little risky in that regard. It had a certain amount of glamour, and who knows, Peter might show up, you know, next thing I know, with my job and the Calypso and telling me to go clean out the cabins and things like that. So I decided economics would be good.
Yeah.
Peter would want to be economist. Nobody cared about economists then. Now they seem to like them a little bit more, or at least we find them more interesting.
Uh-huh.
And so that was one of it. There was my brother. I have to find something Peter's not going to try to outcompete me in. Then my father encouraged me to be an economist. He told me this was when I was already at school. He said I should consider majoring in economics because I was
Mm.
going to do biology. I did do I did zoology.
I remember that. Now this all makes sense. I remember this on your
Yeah, and he
yeah, yeah,
said you should study economics. Now my father never gave serious advice to my brother and me. I think he thought we were mentally disturbed
yeah.
and hopeless. I really do. My father was so bright, you know, and he was an only child. He never saw young kids, you know, goofing around. So when he saw us doing so, which we did all the time, I'm sure he looked at us and thought, okay, well, no need to worry about them. They'll get some unskilled labor jobs and whatever, go play in the street. Anyway, so he gives me this piece of serious advice. You know,
Yeah,
study. It wasn't a joke.
right.
I was waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. So I had taken a class already at Drew University,
Mm-hmm.
which listeners will probably know as it's a very famous liberal arts college. It's outstanding for the fact that it's considered the Harvard of the center of northern New Jersey. But people dispute that. That is, just about everyone who's not at Drew University or part of its administration disagrees, because well, they don't all disagree, but Fairleigh Dickinson claims that it is the Harvard of the center of northern New Jersey. So whether I really attended the Harvard of the center of northern New Jersey or not is something controversial.
It's controversial.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm there majoring in zoology. My father gives me this advice. Well, I took a course. I had already taken a course in environmental economics, which of course tied into my other interests.
Oh yeah, right.
And I really liked that class a lot. I found it quite informative and
What year would this have
sensible.
been, George? This would have been what? Like
1970, 1970, fall of 1975 is when I started grad school.
Drew had an environmental economics class in the mid-70s.
Yes, they had a class, and I think it was called environmental economics. I'm not sure that was the title, but that's what it was about.
That's what it was, yeah.
Yeah, and it was good class. So when my father told me I should pursue, I said, okay, and I started taking more econ classes. I was able to fit enough in with what I had to double major, which I eventually did. But it was only later on, two things happened subsequently. First, I ended up somehow, and this was no thanks to the professors at Drew, becoming interested in market-oriented economics. That happened at Drew. Became interested in monetarism and the Austrians a little bit. Didn't know much about
Drew. At Drew, you started getting
yeah, at Drew. I read everything. I went to the library. I would come back. I would sit in the cafeteria with stacks of books, not talking to anyone and reading. I read everything I could get my hands on. That's when I really became passionate about reading in economics, was at Drew. And anyway, somehow I ended up on the more free market end of things in my inclinations.
You remember what writer that triggered that?
I don't know that there was a specific economist. Like many people, I read Rand's Atlas Shrugged, and that made an impression on me, and that was part of it. I also had a dorm mate who is now Chief Justice in the state of Arizona, Clint Bolick, and you may have heard of him. And we were very, very, very close friends. And he started out as a conservative when I met him. I was more on the left. And we both had these discussions, and Clint had a very big influence on me. So anyway, I started to get more interested in that sort of economics, but not to an extent that was, made that much difference while I was at Drew, because I still was interested in marine biology and all that. And to make a long story short, I tried to pursue a career that combined my now two double interests of economics and marine biology, and that turned out to be a flop. But what happened was that I subsequently found out the hard way from my father that the reason he wanted me to study economics was because he could not stand these free market economists like Milton Friedman. That he would say he loathed them, and we did nothing but argue. Sadly,
so this like your trajectory just kind of confirmed for him that you were just a big troublemaker.
Hopeless, yeah. He thought it was, now he was sure I was an idiot, and he had always thought so, and yeah. So we argued about everything, and my father was kind of a socialist. He actually subscribed to the East German magazine that was kind of like Soviet Life and all that. I remember one time we were arguing about something, and I said, "Papa, how could you read that propaganda?" And he said, "Well, it's no different from the U.S. magazines." I said, "Which one?" and anyway, but I've always said, I thought it was quite natural for my dad to have the views he had, because he was an engineer.
Yeah.
and he was very, very
Oh.
smart.
Mm-hmm.
And now, let's say you're an engineer and you're really, really, really smart, but you don't know a lick of economics.
Yeah.
Why should you believe things are just going to work out, market forces, spontaneous order, invisible hand, laissez-faire, all that? Why? What would make you think that?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The reason economics is, to me, an interesting subject is because it explains the potential for
Mhm.
spontaneous orders and how human societies can figure things out and work together, not always having to be steered by some overseeing power.
Right.
Not everything has to be done by the state.
Right.
And my work, my study of environmental economics really helped me in that direction, I should say,
Mm.
because we're reading about ecology and we're reading about ecological communities, and this stupid Corps of Engineers comes in, builds a dam, and everything goes completely haywire
Yeah.
because they've intervened to accomplish goal X. They haven't considered the subtle self-regulating processes that work in an ecosystem that they've now tried to reshape towards some particular end. And
Mm.
everything ends up backfiring, including the reservoirs getting filled in with sediment and important species being killed off. So I'm already primed
Right.
before I really take economics seriously
Oh, because of
to
your
think
marine biology.
about self-ordering processes.
Yeah.
Except now it's human beings and human communities instead of
Mm.
animalian ecosystems. So I'm already thinking in those terms, and thinking
Right.
of intervention is a very dangerous thing, top
Yeah.
down.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So for me, to that, oddly enough,
Yeah.
my interest in ecology and I also
That was
took
kind of like an on
um,
ramp immediately into kind of the
yeah, and I've always
explanate. Yeah.
yeah, and I've always liked the parallels between ecology and economics. I've always thought of economics as just ecology for human societies. I love Jane Jacobs' little book
I,
comparing the two disciplines,
mm.
and all her other books for that matter.
She has a book where she compares the discipline of economics to.
Oh yes, oh yeah. I think it's
Oh,
called The Nature of Economics, but I'm not sure that's I'm right
huh.
about the title.
Well,
But she has
she,
that.
you didn't
She has
ever
a
meet her.
wonderful book on. She has a wonderful book on ethics called "Systems of Survival" that everybody who's interested in ethics ought to read. It's extremely
Oh, I've only read Death and Life of Great American
yeah,
Cities.
yeah,
That had a
yeah,
huge
yeah.
impact on me.
Don't stop with that.
Oh, okay.
Nothing wrong with it, but her other books, they're very wide ranging and they're
Yeah.
all very good.
Okay.
Anyway, so so here I am with my father having these horrible arguments. He softened up. I didn't change much. He softened up. Anyway, I thought it was quite natural for him to have the views he had because he hadn't studied economics. Unfortunately, he thought he knew it without studying it, or
Yeah.
enough to argue with me about everything. Then, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and Soviet Union and all that, he started to change his mind. He started to ease up. He was also getting older, and by the time I got tenure at University of Georgia with a nice letter from Milton Friedman, among others.
Uh,
My father was very proud of me.
mm,
After he passed away in 2000, I wrote to Milton. At that time, I was about to go up for full professor,
yeah.
which I had to do in a hurry because all the associate professors had voted against me for promotion. So I needed to
You
leapfrog
needed to jump
them
past them.
before they got full. Anyway, uh, I wrote to Milton and told him the story of how my father helped persuade me to become an economist because he hated Milton, among others.
Yeah.
And Milton was born the same year as my dad.
Uh,
Anyway, Milton got a real kick out of that letter. Yeah.
so you and Friedman would interact a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say we interacted a lot. That's not quite right. But we had a regular correspondence. I have a thick
Oh,
sheaf of letters that we exchanged, and we met on several occasions, including one particularly delightful time when I was in Hong Kong. And there's a funny story there too. But but we would exchange letters all the time. What's remarkable is that he always responded at length,
Mm,
and that it wasn't just me, of course, but he kept up correspondence with all kinds of people. I don't know
mm,
how. And I was particularly tickled by his last letter. I had written something to him. I had written something to him. I don't remember exactly what it concerned. Um, and he wrote back 3 or 4, and maybe it was a couple of weeks later, 2 or 3 weeks later.
mm,
And the beginning of his letter to me is just him profusely apologizing for taking so long to reply.
mm.
Think about that. Think about it. He's one of the most famous economists on the planet. God knows how many letters he gets, and
Yeah,
he's apologizing to little old me. I
yeah.
was very, very, very touched by that. I
Mm,
thought it was kind of absurd, frankly, but in a touching way.
huh.
He was a very kind, generous person,
Mm.
and I don't, I don't let people be nasty to Milton Friedman around me.
Yeah, yeah. Was that a
It
big part of
was
your
a
was that correspondence a big part of your intellectual kind of development, having that kind of heady correspondence, somebody taking your views seriously and yet back and forth? Was that a big part of your
certainly was part of it.
Yeah.
A lot of it concerned things like when Kurt Schuler and I were advising the Lithuanian government on currency boards and all that. For
Mhm.
example, I was talking to Milton or writing him, getting his feedback,
Oh,
and he would contain a lot of interesting things. I remember then he said, "Look, your plan has too many moving parts, and some of them probably won't go through." And oops, are you still there?
yeah, I'm here.
Okay. My screen for some reason. I'm just gonna check I see what's happening. My plug wasn't properly plugged in, so I fixed it.
Okay.
Um, the he said you have to have a plan so that if any, so that not everything has to work. Whatever survives, whatever gets through the Congress or whatever the legislature is,
Mm,
is is at least going to accomplish something
yeah.
desirable. It was very good advice. As it
Mm,
is, the Lithuanians didn't follow our plan at all, except they did years later after the first one flopped, which we told them it would.
yeah.
And so, but anyway, yeah, I learned a lot from Milton, but I also kept up a fairly extensive correspondence with several other economists. One of whom was Leland Yeager. Yeager and I corresponded all the time. He's another of my absolute favorite
Yeah,
economists.
I
He
remember
was a
in grad
wonderful,
school.
wonderful man.
I
Wonderful man.
remember in grad school you would assign him to your money students
Yeah.
or I just got the sense from somehow our interactions he was a big person to you.
Yeah, he was. He was, and I loved him. I loved his company. I can't think of a person whose company I enjoyed more. And another big influence was Dick Timberlake. And
No, yeah.
Dick and I, of course, you knew Dick at Georgia. Dick and I were like brothers.
Mm,
Even though he was much older than me. I mean, we were like brothers. We made jokes. We didn't have to even explain anything to each other. It was all understood. I was very, very, very close to Dick. Um, Anna Schwartz was another person who
oh,
I was close to, who was wonderful, who had wonderful conversations. She was always extremely helpful. And there were others. David Laidler was a big influence. Somebody I thought very
was this a
highly of.
community of people? I mean, I know of obviously Friedman, but like, is there a group of you? These are primarily monetary theorists and banking
These were
kind of
all
writers.
monetary people. Yeah, they
Yeah.
were all monetary
How
economists.
did y'all find back then, before I mean, how were you interacting with these people? Is it conferences or is it just personal correspondence?
Both,
Uh-huh.
both. Whenever you saw, of course, I'd see him now and then at conferences,
Yeah.
but mostly. mostly was correspondence. Obviously, I got to know them personally through various events.
Yeah.
I met Dick Timberlake for the first time in 1982
Uh-huh.
at a conference we both attended in Tuxedo, New York, for
Mm.
something called the Committee for Monetary Research and Education. And so I went up to Dick. I was still a grad student, of course. I went up to him, introduced myself. I knew who he was. And we started talking, and he started telling me about this paper he was writing about clearinghouse.
Mm.
And of course, it later was published, a highly regarded paper. And as he was telling me about the paper, I said, well, do you think that, I can't remember what it was called, but I'll just invent a phrase for it. Do you think that the reserve compensation plan was a good idea or not? And he loved me ever since, because at that point he realized that I had read a lot about the clearinghouses and knew a lot of this history.
Yeah.
Anyway, we hit it off, and he was lovely, lovely man. Another
Yeah.
person I should mention among my mentors, and this, of course, is apart from my real mentor, Larry White,
Mm.
uh, was is Charles Goodhart. Charles Goodhart, another very, very kind man whose work I admired a great deal, who has been extremely generous to me and supportive. And I particularly valued the support of people like Charles and also David Laidler,
Mm.
who were not, considered free market or libertarian or anything like that, because with them I knew, though I think this was true also of most of the others, with them I knew that it wasn't a question of them approving of my ideology or anything like that, which I never really wanted me, and I don't want anybody to like me because of my politics,
Yeah.
which I consider unimportant.
Right.
I always hope that people take me seriously for my work.
Mm-hmm. Um, there's this, my first time, reading about you, and I've told you this, was I was not even planning on being an economist. But I was reading the Austrians, and I found your pamphlet on praxeology, and I read that thing back and forth, and loved it. And that was one of the reasons I picked Georgia. I picked Georgia for a few reasons, but my familiarity with you was one of them. And there was all these Austrian kind of fellow travelers or Austrian people at Georgia at the time. And so I know, but as I've gotten to know you, I've definitely gotten the sense that you're your own person, and in a way that maybe sometimes, well, I won't say Austrians are not their own person, but you sort of always felt very different, like that you weren't a part of anything. You just were George Selgin, an intellectual, and a very intelligent economist doing his own kind of work and reasoning. So I have this, with that kind of backdrop. There's this opening line to Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. All right. So, with that line in mind, I wanted to talk a little bit about your personal journey through Austrian economics as both a intellectual field, but also a community, as it was in your life. So, thinking back, what would you consider? Tell me a little bit about the best of times, both of it in your life and what you would consider to be the best of times for Austrian economics as a field.
Well, you know, my my introduction to Austrian economics, my serious introduction to it, from my being, sorry, I'm trying to close something that seems to be hogging up a lot of memory. I hope that helps. Hold on a second. For some reason, it won't close this file. Hold on, Scott. Let me try one more time.
Sure.
Okay, I think I've closed down. Word is becoming a pain in the ass. I don't know
It's
why.
it's going to be even more when this new AI stuff gets
Because it
integrated in.
shouldn't. Yeah, yeah. I don't know why. It seems to now be
All you're
very
going to have to
slow on
do
my
in a
machine.
year, all you're going to have to do in a year, George, is just go to Chat GPT and say,
Hold on a second. I'm clearing
finish
my.
my book on the New Deal. You're just going to tell Chat GPT to finish it and it'll finish
Yeah, yeah.
it.
All right. So, there you are. So, I knew a little bit about Austrian economics. Before I went to NYU. What
Uh-huh.
happened was I was studying at the University of Rhode Island.
You were
And
studying there?
yeah, I was in the master's program in marine resource economics. That was
Oh,
part of
so you
my,
weren't yet committed after at Drew that you were going to go this route into econ.
well, it was both.
Oh,
It was part of my attempt to marry my two interests of economics and marine biology. So it's marine resource
oh,
economics.
you were doing resource economics. Got it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, marine. And to make a long story short, I wasn't. I found the program there kind of boring,
Mm-hmm.
and I was supposed to go to Honduras as a Peace Corps volunteer,
Mm-hmm.
and I had gotten to the point of being inducted into the Peace Corps. It was a very long, complicated, difficult process to
Hmm. I've lost you.
get myself assigned to a particular yeah, are we here now? Am I here now?
Yeah.
Am I here? Okay. I don't know what my computer's doing, Scott. It's usually not this. So I'm trying to turn off a bunch of stuff. Give me a second to try and
Sure. I'm
see
gonna
if.
pause it real quick.
Okay, Scott, sorry.
That's okay. All right. Yeah. So you were saying at Rhode Island, actually. You were talking about Rhode Island.
Yeah, I was at Rhode Island and I was studying marine resource economics. I got disenchanted with the program. I had arranged to go to Honduras as a Peace Corps volunteer and work on a project down there. Long story that goes back to my days as a student briefly at Auburn University, where I didn't
Mm,
study Austrian economics. I studied aquaculture, fish farming.
mm,
And I could tell you all kinds of stories about that. But anyway, I'm up in Rhode Island and I arranged to go to Honduras, but then my professor, one of the professors up there said, "Oh, don't go there. That place is a mess. Uh, I'll get you out to Indonesia to study the shrimp and other farms out there." And
mm,
Indonesia was a magic word for me then. And
mm.
I said, "Okay." So I called the Honduran desk officer for the Peace Corps and told him, "Forget it." And if somebody could have strangled me over the phone, it would have happened then. Anyway, but then the Indonesia thing fell apart.
Mm.
I couldn't see. It eventually occurred to me that it didn't seem to be happening. The resource economics program was really boring. There are only so many Hamiltonians you can take, and
That's
and
true.
so I got interested at the same time in inflation. Inflation was
Mm.
1980. Inflation it's very, very serious. And
Yeah.
I'm reading everything I can read about money and inflation. That's when I became interested in monetary economics.
Oh,
And I read shelves of books, all of them more or less bad, as far as I could determine
yeah.
in explaining what was happening.
Yeah.
Till I read The Theory of Money and Credit,
Uh-huh.
read the whole thing, and I thought, wow, this is really good. That was a
It
really
is Keynes, Theory of Money and Credit.
no, this is Mises' Theory of
Oh,
Money and Credit.
Mises Theory of Money and Credit. Okay, got it. All
Theory of
right.
Money and Credit on Mises, 1912 originally.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And and then I got Hayek. I read Denationalization of Money, and I thought, oh my God, this is weird. And and I thought, I really am curious about this. Anyway, things get complicated because a lot of things start happening at once. I
Hmm.
quit. I quit the program at URI. One of my professors there points out to me that there's an Austrian program at NYU
He notices, he knows that you're
He
like
knows I'm
beginning on the
interested in that. Yeah, and he hands me a copy of the Austrian Economics newsletter with a picture of Kerzner on the front.
Oh,
So I'm like, oh, these people still exist.
exist. Right.
That would be cool. I signed up for a summer research grant from the Institute for Humane Studies, which was then still at Menlo Park, to do a summer project on, I think what I called it was free banking and the monopoly in money. And what I did in that project was the paper, somebody posted it. I don't know how they got a copy. Somebody posted the paper on Twitter once.
Really?
Yeah, a PDF. Can you believe it? I don't know where they found it. Anyway, I don't even have a copy. The idea was, let's go through American banking history and see whether it was all the government's fault.
Oh.
And I did, and it felt like shooting fish in a barrel, to be honest. I'm like, this is actually a pretty good way to look at this stuff. Anyway, I write that, and in the course of doing that work with IHS supporting me, it was like $1,500, but back then that wasn't
That's like a lot of money back then. Yeah.
Yeah, it was all right. And Walter Grinder, who was the kind of the intellectual, leading spirit, the late Walter Grinder at IHS, then shared with me some chapters from what was then Larry White's dissertation. So in the
Where did Larry
meantime,
do his doctorate?
at UCLA under Leyenhofen.
Oh, okay.
In the meantime, I think I've already applied to the NYU program.
And Larry's an assistant professor at this time at NYU.
No, Larry's a grad student.
Oh.
He's not finished yet.
Okay.
So I wrote to Larry because I really liked his chapters on Scottish banking. I wrote to him and I said, when you're done and you get a job, tell me where. I think I'd like to come study with you. I didn't know that you were supposed to study with famous seasoned professors who will help you get a job later on, but Larry was the one doing the work that interested me. So
absolutely,
I made the unusual move of choosing to have as my advisor somebody who just got a job. Yeah. Well, Larry wrote to me and said he got a job at NYU. And then I don't know if it was before or later, I got a call. It was around midnight. I got a call. At this time, I'm back at my folks' home in Connecticut. I get a call. This is Israel Kerzner. I'm calling to let you know that we're going to grant you a full fellowship to come to NYU. Anyway, so I have now. I said, Professor Kerzner, you can call me. And he said, I'm sorry for calling you late. I said, you can call me anytime with that news. So now I've got my fellowship. I got Larry, and we all converge. We converge at NYU at the same time. Yeah. And that's how I set off on my path to do research on free banking. And,
And, so NYU, what was NYU like? I mean,
So NYU was two things. NYU was the Austrian program, which I was part of. That's why I could have a fellowship. I didn't have to do any teaching or anything like that.
Was von Mises there?
No. Mises had been dead.
Oh, he'd been dead. Okay.
Yeah, Mises had taught sort of at NYU.
I always heard that.
Sometime before, but never as a faculty member.
He was just like an adjunct that would just pick up classes?
Not even. It was a special arrangement, a private arrangement. Oh. Anyway, the details of which now escape me. I may have known them at some time. Anyway, I know I missed Mises. I met Hayek, but I never met. I couldn't have met Mises unless I'd been much more precocious than I was. So anyway, I did meet Richard Ebeling in those early days at NYU. We hung out with Richard a lot, and that's the closest thing you can have to meeting Ludwig von Mises since Mises died. Richard Ebeling, he's the closest thing. Okay. Richard won't mind me saying that.
I actually don't know that connection. Well, he was a co-author of Mises, or what was he, just close with him?
No, he's just one of the greatest students of von Mises.
He was a student of von Mises.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
he knows everything there is to know about von Mises.
I see. Okay. So you're
And,
at
and
NYU. So you're at NYU. Larry's there.
so there's two things at NYU. There's the Austrian program of which I was a part, which, by the way, required you to do everything an ordinary and
Yeah.
a grad student had to do, plus
Mhm.
attend the Austrian seminar and otherwise be part of that program. And
Because
then, of
NYU
course,
is at that time, just like today, it's a mainstream
very
neoclassical.
mainstream, very
Yeah.
mainstream. And so I enjoyed it. I mean, the Austrian seminar was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there were all these people there. They're very, very interesting. And some of them actually ended up getting their degrees, like me.
Mm.
I think it was the exception rather than the rule to actually finish. I may
Yeah.
be wrong about that.
Yeah.
And that was very stimulating, those seminars and other discussions and all that. Taking classes, I took classes with Macklop. I took a class with Kersner. I never took a class with Larry White.
You
Uh,
didn't?
no, I never took a class with
He
Larry.
wasn't teaching graduate stuff.
That I think that may be right. Yeah, he may
Okay.
not have taught. I'm not sure. I don't remember. But in any event, I didn't take a class with him.
Huh.
I would go into his office and talk, and
Mm.
sometimes Larry would say something too. It was very quiet.
Wait, so was your field, was it macro or money?
Monetary. I was monetary
So
economics.
they had a monetary field.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
Okay. And it was Larry that was your main dissertation advisor?
Yes, Larry was my advisor. Yeah. And
Okay.
Anna was on my committee, though later she forgot and insisted she
Anna
wasn't.
Schwartz?
Yes, I went upstairs and said, "Would you be on my committee?" Which nobody ever did. And there's Anna Schwartz. And if you don't take advantage of that, you're done.
You're
So,
crazy. Yeah.
so I had Anna on my committee,
Oh, wow.
and
What's she
yeah.
like? What was she like?
Well, I adored Anna. She
Yeah.
was wonderful. I have on my Altem site, I occasionally I'll write a little memorial when people pass away who I cared about,
Yeah.
or Economist.
Uh-huh.
And I wrote one about Anna, I wrote one about Dick, I wrote one about Leland, and she was terrific.
Yeah.
She didn't hold back. She was tough.
Mm.
She was smart, and she liked me, which
Mm.
was nice, and always very kind.
What
Always
did she think
extremely kind.
about what did she think about this work that you and Larry start doing together?
Well, I remember very distinctly, Anna said to me, "Look, don't put all your eggs in this free banking basket, or you're going to get chewed up and spat out."
Uh,
Kind of happened anyway on a couple occasions, but I
yeah.
did take her advice, and actually, relatively not that much of my publication record is free banking. It's
Yeah.
it's a little bit, but it's
Right.
not a lot. The first book was my dissertation,
Mm.
so I diversified so I wouldn't get
Yeah.
treated as a one note Johnny.
Right.
And I still when I got fired from George Mason, uh, the official reason given by my then department head
Yeah.
that I was too narrowly focused on free banking, and
Was that
which
a
was
tenure denial or was it like
no,
you did?
no, third year review. They gave me the HEVO. It's an interesting story that I probably shouldn't repeat here, but
Oh shoot, I wish you
I will
would.
tell you, it was very, very bad. Not
Was
for
it
me.
hard? Was that
It
was
was
it
nasty.
emotionally very difficult for you to have
Of
go through something like
course,
that? Yeah.
I got fired a week before my wedding day.
Oh, do you see it
And
coming?
not really. It started with getting fired by the Austrian. The Austrians fired me.
The
Um,
Austrians like intellectually fired you
yeah,
because you're like heterodox a little bit.
no, I'll tell you very bluntly, they fired me because I was publishing too much. They told me to quit, cut it out, and I wouldn't. That is the
Mm.
literal. And then they came up with a bunch of trumped up
Who are
reasons
the
for.
Austrians back then? Who's active? I mean,
We have to name names.
well, okay, I don't know who these people are. Yeah, I mean, I know Peter
Yeah, let's not
Betke.
name names. Let people look them up. Go
Wait,
ahead and
so
look it
yeah,
up.
okay, okay. So
Anyway,
you're
they were the ones, and then of
that
course
was
the rest of the
pretty. That
faculty
was
were
what
happy to
was
get
it
rid of me.
traumatizing? Would you use a word like traumatizing, or would you say it's less than that?
Well, I don't want your listeners to think that, I'm a basket case or anything like that, but I got over it. But it
Sure.
was rough at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It almost ended my career, because who wants a used Austrian who's just been booted out of George Mason?
Yeah.
And really, I couldn't get another job, or wouldn't have been able to get another job, except that I'd spent the summer before in Hong Kong and with John Greenwood,
Mm.
learning about currency boards and all that. And I knew the folks at University of Hong Kong, including
Mm.
the then department head Stephen Chung, concerning whom one can tell stories all week. And I knew they were looking for people, they needed people. So I said to myself, well, if I go to Hong Kong, nobody's going to look askance at it, because everybody will think that's really an interesting thing to do, which it was. So it won't look bad on my CV, and it'll keep me, on my feet for a while till something else comes up. But if it hadn't been for that escape route, I would have had to give up my career as an economist right then
Oh,
and there.
what a great opportunity.
Nobody would hire me.
What a
Nobody would hire me.
what a fortuitous thing. They must have been so grateful.
Well,
I mean, for Hong Kong working out and being that lifeline.
yeah, it was a big change, of course.
Sure.
But anyway, it tided me over till I was able to come back for the job at Georgia,
Yeah.
where they also tried to fire me for my whole career there. They were trying to somebody was always trying to fire me.
Yeah.
In fact, every place I've ever worked, people have been trying to fire me.
Yeah. It just at some point you're like you just it gets to be, does it get easier and easier, or is it
No,
rising
not
marginal
exactly.
costs of
No,
getting
I've
fired?
always wanted to work someplace where everybody loved me,
Where
but
everybody wants you there.
I'm just
I
not
hear it's
that
better to
lovable.
I hear it's better to work a place where they want you.
Yeah, it is better. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
So
George, okay, I am absolutely loving our conversation, and I want to propose, because these are only hour blocks,
yeah,
that maybe we could have a part 2 conversation,
of
and
course you can.
and
Yeah.
because I love this story, and I love you very much, and so you've been such a surprisingly, because I didn't ultimately take any classes with you, but you were always just, you came to my dissertation defense, you read my dissertation, that had nothing to do with money. I've just always been such a deeply uh deep admirer and look up to you. And so I would love to have a second conversation if we can. I got to
Sure,
go pick
yeah.
up a job market candidate right now.
Okay, yeah. I'd be glad to. Let's pick up where we left off. I was about to
Absolutely.
tell you about the other side of my NYU experience,
I
the
can't wait. I
non-Austrian
can't wait.
side.
I have
I
always
have
wanted
some
to
good
learn.
stories.
Yeah, no, I actually have always been really interested in NYU is this thing that I don't really understand about, the what it was with that little Austrian piece. So I want to come back to that. But I've really enjoyed this conversation. This is part 1, hopefully, and we'll do a part 2, and I'll follow up with you where we can set it up.
Okay, Scott. All
Okay.
right.
All right.
Enjoy
Bye,
very
George.
much.
Gonna see us through. Honey, you need me. Baby, I need